Hello, scholars. Welcome to another week of our online public speaking course. Now, this week, we do have a couple chapters to go over, and many of you were a bit concerned about having to do your presentation. This week, I actually reconsidered everything, and I believe that it would be best if you had an opportunity to practice using the resource that we're going to use for our first presentation before actually being graded on using that resource. So the first thing that we're going to do this week to practice using the resource, which is called Flipgrid, is doing our discussion post in Flipgrid. So if you click on discussion post, you'll see that I have information about what you should be discussing, as well as an instructional video to show you how to use Flipgrid and a link to grant you access to Flipgrid. Now, in order to access the actual discussion post where you will be posting your video, you have to use the password Golden Orator. Now, Golden has a capital G and Orator has a capital O. That's how you will get into Flipgrid. And your video should be 60 to 90 seconds, and you'll answer the questions that I have included in your discussion post. So this week we are going to be talking about supporting materials, and we're going to be discussing what's included in chapter 7. So as always, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see my slides. I don't know why this up there. Okay. And I did a little blank slide. I hope you guys don't mind that I don't have a whole bunch of color, but I did it because I'm using the resource that's in MindTap for flashcards to do the slides. So the same thing that you'll see on this slide, these slides, is what you'll see in MindTap if you click on flashcards. And these are basically terminologies. So one of the first terminologies that I think is extremely important that you're familiar with is what I mean when I say supporting materials. Now, this is important because when we're actually doing our presentations and I give you feedback on what you've incorporated, I will be using terminology from the chapters. So when I talk about supporting materials, I'm talking about that information that helps bolster your argument for whatever your main topic is. So it's going to be evidence that's used to demonstrate the worth of your idea or how credible your idea is. It's always fine and dandy to share your opinion and give your thoughts about various topics, but it strengthens your credibility and the likelihood that we'll believe or trust what you have to say if you have supporting materials, definitions, examples, those things that contribute to the reasoning of why you think what you think. That's always beneficial to be incorporated into your presentations. Now, one of my favorite philosophers, Aristotle, discussed years ago of various things that we now know as means of persuasion. Now, the means of persuasion are things that you've probably studied in high school or maybe even thereafter, maybe even before high school. They're basically those items that enable most people who are writing and or speaking to persuade their audience. Now, one of these means is ethos, or some people might suggest that it's ethos. And ethos is appeal to a speaker's credibility. Basically, you are questioning whether or not a particular thing is ethical. You're suggesting that whatever you're discussing is something that sparks a question of ethics or how fair something is, how credible something is. Now, you can do this in a number of ways. One way might be looking at the credibility of the speaker. We often look at nonverbal factors such as personal appearance, the way that individuals share eye contact during presentation, the way that they exhibit anxiety, whether or not they look, if they're fidgeting or doing nonverbal movements that might indicate that they're ill prepared or that they don't know what they're talking about or they're not being honest. All of those things can take away from a speaker's credibility or their ethos. Now, listening to the things that they say, whether or not it sounds fair or just or appropriate, the words, the verbal aspect of the message, that might pull away from ethos as well. Pathos is emotional appeal or appeal to emotions. Now, this begs the question of how does this thing make you feel? When I'm discussing these things and I am providing justification for why I believe you should feed the children, for instance, when I show you images of poor, starving children in horrible living conditions, does that appeal to your emotions? Does that make you feel bad about their situation? Logos is appeal to logic, whether this makes sense. I think that's pretty straightforward. Does it make sense? Does it seem reasonable or rational? Is it objective? Is this something that I can clearly observe for myself and recognize to either be fact or fiction? Now, mythos is an appeal to cultural beliefs and values. So if you were to ask a question that you know is related to what the audience members consider to be a cultural value system, so to ask people in a church congregation, what would Jesus do, would be a question of beliefs and values. When you ask the question of what is just or democratic to Americans who suggest that we really believe in democracy, we really believe in justice, when you ask those questions to those individuals, that's based on value systems. You might not ask that same question to someone who lives within a dictatorship. So when we think about mythos, we're thinking about value systems and cultural belief systems. Now, an anecdote is a brief narrative, like a story. But typically, when we think of anecdotes, we are thinking about an actual story that has occurred in the life or lives of real individuals and that enables us to learn some type of lesson. Typically, we include anecdotes in our stories, we include anecdotes in our presentation in an effort to paint a picture of the severity of an issue or how relatable an issue might be or how realistic a scenario might be for individuals in the audience. A narrative is a bit different because it does not necessarily have to be something that has actually occurred. And it is a full story with the complete plot and often presented in a dramatic fashion that a little bit more than entertains, but engages the audience and kind of reels them in to make them want to pay attention to what you have to say about this particular topic. Now, examples, the actual definition is an illustration or case that represents a larger group or class of things. So I might give you an example of a definition. I might give you one example of an illustration that paints a vivid picture of what other illustrations should look like or sound like. A definition, however, is a statement that describes the essence, precise meaning, or scope of a word or phrase. For instance, there are different types of definitions. Some definitions describe exactly in detail what something is in regard to its classification. For example, if you were to look up human, you might, I'm almost certain that you'll get a classification definition that discusses that humans are mammals, so on and so forth. Whereas some definitions do not describe exactly what the thing is, it talks about the utility of that thing. So if you were to look up tweezers maybe, or nail clippers. Maybe those items would be defined based on their utility and what they're used for. Now, there are two different types of meanings that we associate with various terminologies. One is the denotative meaning, and the denotative meaning is the literal meaning that is often found in dictionaries. This is the objective meaning, what we understand a word to mean regardless of where we are. This is always what this word means. The connotative meaning, however, is based on association. Now, depending on how a word has been used throughout the lives of various individuals or within their societal group may dictate how we receive that word or what we think about that word. For instance, the word stupid literally means that you are not using proper reasoning. It means that you knew better, but you did not do better. And everyone has done something stupid at some point in time. However, the word has gotten a very negative connotative meaning. While everyone has done something stupid before, no one wants to be called stupid because it comes off as a derogatory, demeaning, bad thing. An analogy is a type of comparison that describes something by comparing it to something that it remembers. I'm sorry, that it resembles. So when we talk about things that resemble one another, we'd like to compare those things that fit in the same category. For instance, if we were going to compare people, we could say that, oh man, I'm trying to think of somebody famous. Beyonce is famous. Let me think of someone who is new that could be compared to Beyonce. I don't want to be offensive, but I'm trying to think of a new singer, and I'm really struggling. Okay, those little girls who she mentors. I think one of them may be named Haley, and I think one of the little girls is supposed to be playing Ariel in the new movie. And I'm just going to guess that one of the little girls is named Haley. If we were to say Haley is the Beyonce of this generation, that would be an analogy because it's a comparison between two things that resemble one another. It's easy to make that connection because they're both human, they're both entertainers. Not only are they both entertainers, but they're singers. And I'm guessing that they sing similar music. So that comparison would be an analogy based on the fact that you're comparing very similar things. Now, a metaphor is a figure of speech that makes an implicit comparison between two things. When I say implicit, I mean that they are comparing two things by calling the one thing another thing. So, for example, a metaphor might be that this class is hell on earth. I don't think the class is hell on earth, but you're comparing two things that are not necessarily alike, but there is a way of thinking about them that might justify the comparison. For instance, we say that people go to hell when they do bad things. And maybe the bad thing that you did to get in this class is to go and register for it. And we say that hell is for the purpose of torturing people. And you might feel like you're being tortured in this class. I don't know. But that would definitely be a metaphor that compares two things in an implicit way. A simile is a figure of speech that makes an explicit comparison between two things using the words like or as. So saying that someone is dumb as a rock, using the word as might be a good way of comparing. Saying someone smells like spoiled cabbage, I don't think that's a good example. But you get the point, using like or as to compare two things. Oh, I thought I had another example, but I'm just going to leave it because I don't want this video to be too long. All right, a testimony is an individual's opinion or experiences about a particular topic. So there are two different types of testimonies. There's a lay testimony and there's an expert testimony. A lay testimony is a testimony given by someone based solely on their opinion without any formal education about the topic. So if you were to see someone get in a car accident and you testified to say that it looked like one person caused the accident, that would be a lay testimony because you're not necessarily an expert in regard to automobiles and what needs to be done and what things could cause malfunction in vehicles or anything like that. So that just an observation about an experience would be a lay testimony. An expert testimony would be one given by someone who has formal education in the topic that is being studied. In a topic that is being discussed. So if you were a psychologist and you interviewed someone who was accused of a crime and you offered your opinion about maybe why they did it or whether or not they might do it over again, because you're an expert and you have, some type of legitimate reasoning behind why your opinion is valid, or maybe that why you consider it to be fact, and people have a consideration that you're credible and trustworthy, then that would be considered an expert testimony. Now, a fact is an observation based on actual experience. This is something completely objective. A fact is something that you probably would not argue against because it's not subjective. There aren't various ways of interpreting whatever it is. Either it is or it isn't. And a fact would suggest that it is something that can't legitimately be argued against. Now, an inference is an interpretation of facts. So typically when we look at inference, we're looking at a prediction or a conclusion that has been made about a fact. So thinking about maybe even one thing that has occurred and drawing a connection between that thing and something that you think previously occurred that's connected to that thing, or something that you might infer is going to happen in response to this particular fact or this particular occurrence that has happened. Opinion is a way of thinking or judgment about something. So opinions typically are not based on facts per se, but just your interpretation of those facts. And opinions do not necessarily have to be supported by justification or any research or credible sources. Opinions, once you label them as opinions, they're just based solely on your way of thinking and your way of processing that information. Statistics, which are often valuable in presentations, are numerical data or information that has been gathered to support a claim. So statistics can be based on just a small group of individuals that has enabled researchers to draw inferences about what is more than likely the case for a larger group. So usually when you hear statistics, they haven't gathered information about everyone in the population, but they have numerical values that they've gathered from a small group of individuals that have been incorporated into equations that allow us to draw inferences, that allow us to make educated guesses about what is probably true for a larger population. All right, guys, those are all the terms that we're going to go over this week for this chapter in particular. There will be another chapter. And as always, if you ever need to contact me, feel free to shoot me an email. I do apologize because last week I was locked out of my account. I was not able to log in because my password expired or it was wrong. Something was going on with my password, but I was locked out and I just got access today. So now that I have access, if you guys need to reach out to me, send me an email. And if you ever need something immediately, or if you email and I do not respond back within 24 hours, feel free to text or call me at 601-270-2207. All right, guys, have a great week.